Welcome back to the channel. I have more Thomas Wooden Railway 2022 characters to unbox and showcase to you from the Thomas Wooden Railway 2022 revitalization of the beloved TWR range. Of course, after the failure of Thomas Wood, they brought back the classic branding for Thomas Wooden Railway and in some cases drastically changed the design of the models, although it's still the beloved characters that we all adore. With that being said, I know it might be arduous for you as the audience. It definitely is for me that we've been sluggish through these different videos, taking a look at this new quote-unquote range, as it has been almost 3 years now since spring 2022, when these models were first put on shelves and able to be purchased online. And even longer than that, we think back to summer 2021 when these models were first leaked. So it probably is boring that I'm still taking a look at these old models. Nonetheless, I think it's important for my channel that we continue this series and try to get through all of these models that I've purchased. And at the end of the day, I think they deserve recognition. However much we've talked about them, it is really special that we were able to get these in modern Thomas & Friends merchandise, and I think they are really great models at their core. With that being said, let's start the video. You can see I have two great characters here, Henry the Green Engine, and also Diesel, Devious Diesel as he's also known. So why don't we take a look at our first item, which I think we'll start with the smaller one this time, and we'll take a look at Diesel. If you are a Thomas fan of any caliber, you are probably very familiar with Diesel, and that is for a good reason, as Diesel has been heavily promoted by the show for many, many years. He has gotten many different types of toys and different merchandise ever since his introduction in Season 2. He's appeared in various different episodes and specials since then. And I think Diesel is the archetype of a villain for Thomas & Friends. He's the quintessential Diesel and the token antagonist for the series. I think oftentimes people pigeonhole Diesel as a simple brute, just the playground bully. However, I think if you look deeper at his character, not to get on my soapbox here, but you can make a lot of different allegories about Diesel, teaching about real-life lessons or analogies about different things that happen in real life. I won't dive too deep into that, but maybe that's something I could explore one day, as at his core, I think Diesel is a very interesting and intricate character for the show, just the way that he is portrayed and what he represents as a whole. Speaking of the merchandise of Diesel, here are two wooden railway models of Diesel that I own in my collection. And I don't have all the different models of Diesel, so forgive me for that, but here are the ones that I do own. This is a Mattel Diesel made by Mattel in 2013 when they redesigned all the items with the new CGI updates. And this Diesel, I think, is a pretty good model. He retains many of the details from previous Diesels, although I'm not the biggest fan of his smiling face. That's probably about the only drawback to this Diesel, I'd say. Besides that, a pretty good model. Here is a Diesel made by Learning Curve. This was the 2005 or 6, perhaps, redesign of Diesel. As you can see, it says the Learning Curve on the bottom of his chassis. And this Diesel has that classic angry face and is very shiny. You can see he has that coat of protective sheen that Learning Curve put on a lot of their models during this era. And this is an updated version of the old Diesel they had in the 90s and early 2000s. Besides that, there is the Tomy Diesel, which was released in 2011. It's pretty similar to these two, except it has a CGI face, but that face is an upset face. So I believe perhaps that was to coincide with Day of the Diesels, the Thomas special, maybe in 2011, yes, because Blue Mountain Mystery was 2012. So 2011, Day of the Diesels, so maybe that's why that Diesel had that face. I'm thinking back to those blind bag sort of items where it was a dirty, salty Diesel, Percy, or Thomas. So that was a Diesel made by Tomy. although these are the only two diesel variants I have in my collection. With all that being said, we'll take a look at this diesel now. Speaking of Thomas Wooden Railway 2022, I'd like to remember, I don't have the greatest memory of this, but this diesel was one of the first items that was really pushed out into stores and online, along with Thomas and Rosie and Gordon. I feel like this was one of the first items that was mass produced and also purchased one of the earliest, as opposed to characters such as Henry or Kenji or Rebecca, which were released in a quasi Wave 2, although most of these items were all just kind of lumped together in one year. Going back to this diesel, let's take a quick look at the packaging. You know the drill, we've done this in all these videos, so I won't have that much to say. You can see Diesel is pictured on the front there, and then it has that classic Thomas Wooden Railway logo. On the top, it does have Diesel in different languages. I'm not sure what the differences are between the different packages, why some of them have that and some of them don't. I think that's just sort of a random thing that they did. I don't think maybe there was any rhyme or reason to that. On the back of the packaging, as I alluded to, in sort of a mismatch of different things, you can see it has the tab back here that some of these items have, and it also has a price tag. I bought this diesel at Barnes & Noble for $17. Kind of a steep price, if I will say so myself. I think it's a little expensive for what you're getting here for this small engine. I think this would be more fair at maybe $15 or $14. Although Thomas Wooden Railway has always been expensive, so I can't gripe about that too much. There's a lot of jargon on the back about licensing stuff, so we won't harp on that any longer. Pulling Diesel out of his sleeve right here, once again, a great feature for the packaging that I think whoever came up with this was really thinking ahead, and I think this is an example of a good innovation and a good change. Sometimes change for the sake of change is not worthwhile. It honestly harms the quality and the branding of an item, but I think moving from those clear plastic packaging to this was actually a very smart move, and I think it actually worked out pretty well for this range, and almost feels like this always was like this. I feel like Thomas Wooden Railway would benefit from a packaging like this throughout its entire history, although I think it still looks great with what we've got now. So on the side, you can see it once again has that logo. It says Diesel and Fisher-Price, and then you can see Diesel in there. I tried to pick out one that I saw didn't have any wonky eyes or misprinting, although you can never be sure, as of course, since he's tied down, I can't see the other side of his body. So let's try to get this guy out with causing any damage. Actually, last time when I was unboxing Edward, I nicked the bottom of his model and made a little impression with the scissors into the wood. So let's hope that doesn't happen again. I don't really feel like damaging this Diesel. I've had him in the packaging. Gosh, this must have been 2 years maybe I've had this guy in the packaging, just finding time to make this video. And I want to get through more of the main characters first before I took a look at Diesel. Henry I got a little later on, but this Diesel has been in my collection for quite a while now. So let's see if I can maneuver my way through this and try to unbox this guy. I might have to do it off camera. I was able to pull him out enough that I was able to cut the string back here. So that's just what the packaging looks like without Diesel inside of it. I'm not sure if this one came with a pamphlet. I think if you open this tab on the back, you might be able to see, but I'll leave that for another day. A great package just to have now in my collection. I've been saving all of these different packages, and I think honestly they look pretty nice. So here is Diesel, and my first impression is that he is a very nice looking model, although his proportions are a little more strange than I thought they would be. So let's get into details here. If I bring in, let's just say I bring in this Learning Curve Diesel, you can see that where his chassis is, that his main body and face are offset backwards from that chassis to give a lip right here. Although for this Diesel, which ironically is actually more accurate for his model in the television series, how he's often portrayed, this Diesel is flush with his buffer beam. So there's no gap there. His face kind of protrudes out along with the magnet. And although this is an odd look, as I've been accustomed to this diesel for so long, I think that actually this is more accurate, and I think it will probably grow on me after time. On the bottom of the chassis, it says diesel horizontally and also has that little cloud. Interestingly, the wheels say 2020. I haven't recorded one of these videos in a long time, so I actually can't remember if any of the other wheels also had dates on them. But if Mattel was working on these in 2020, I mean, it's been a long time since they've had this, at least maybe in the preparation or design phase. If we think that Thomas Wood came out in 2018, probably almost immediately they were working on a successor to Thomas Wood, since that was such a colossal failure for their toy line. So this diesel has those wheels that kind of stick out. Not the biggest fan of them. I still prefer these older type wheels. And it looks a little weird for Diesel. You can see how they stick out so far from his main body. And I have mixed feelings about it. Once again, it will probably grow on me with time. Although it's not something I'm too happy about. I'd rather just have these old wheels. With that being said, not to repeat myself, he has the ladders along the side, which this time are actually a molded detail, as opposed to just being painted on in these two variants of Diesel. His face, well, we haven't talked about his face, so let's do it. This Diesel is looking off to the right side. This is the same with a lot of these models. They seem to have their eyes in a very specific position, and he's looking off to his left, I suppose, and our right. He has a cunning look on his face. It looks like he has a little smirk. Maybe he's up to something. One of those eyebrows is raised. Honestly, I think that's a pretty good Diesel face, especially for the CGI era. I think that's a face Diesel made in that television series, that rendition of the series, I should say. And I guess this is also a mix with Thomas All Engines Go, so maybe as an amalgamation of those two variants of Diesel, this face looks pretty good. He has the red buffer beam detailing and also buffer detailing, which neither of these Diesels had. So this Diesel, you can see that he has nothing on the back of him, which is the same as these two variants of Diesel. On the top, his detailing's a little bit different than this one, although it's actually almost identical to this one, with the exception of that line right there down the middle of his main body. And he is a little bit longer than the older version of Diesel. You can see this one is pretty compact. This one is more elongated. On the side, instead of white lining, he has more a grayish color. I'm not the biggest fan of the printing job on these items. It looks almost like there was just a stamp they put on these, and I've made this analogy before. It almost looks like TV static. Like a TV's not quite in focus, and it gets kind of blurry. That's sort of what this reminds me of, how it's not very clear, it kind of looks fuzzy, and not the most professional. He does have side rod detailing, which is a nice addition, and on the side, his detailing is mirrored. His magnets are pretty much the same as all of these guys, although, like I said, they do feel a little bit cheaper than the old magnets. You can see the level of plastic was a little bit thicker compared to these ones, and we know that this line has actually had magnet trouble in the past, as I think maybe a year ago now, the troublesome trucks were recalled, which is because their magnets fell off. So they have had trouble with that. It looks like none of these other models were particularly affected by that recall, although always something to keep in mind. With that being said, I think once again this is a pretty good rendition of Diesel, and one that I'm very happy to now finally have unboxed and in my collection. So I think it's time to move on to the next engine we'll take a look at, which is Henry the Green Engine, an even better model in my opinion, but let's hear my thoughts about it. And now we move on to the big and strong green engine, Henry. They say honesty is the best policy, so let me be upfront with you guys. This segment is being filmed about 5 months after the Diesel one, so I'll say right now, there is a high likelihood that there will be no continuity between this segment and that one. even more so between my other Thomas Wooden Railway 2022 reviews and this segment right here. Just because I'm filming this in July and the other segment was filmed in January. So I have no idea what I said in that one. I can't really remember my thoughts on the other Thomas 2022 engines. So I'm just putting that out there. One funny note is that if you can hear in my voice, I'm currently sick. So the only continuity between that January diesel segment and this part, which will be in one continuous video, is that I'm sick. So the cold carried over. Of course, it's not a continuous cold, but I somehow got another one. So that's a little bit of irony. But regardless, let's move on to this beautiful model. And I do remember that I had high praise for this Henry when he was first released. Now, this Henry was a part of Wave 2. Of course, in 2022, I believe it was maybe in March that Wave 1 released. And then about May, Wave 2 was fully on shelves in Barnes & Noble and ready to purchase on Amazon. And, of course, at that point, we had very high hopes for this range. Now it is absolutely dead in the water. No more Thomas Wooden Railway, which could have been expected, but is a pretty hard nail in the coffin for Thomas merchandise lovers such as myself, and of course all of you, that we have to continuously suffer with subpar merchandise. I know there's some push along or Trackmaster or whatever the heck that stuff is still called. I'm not really into that kind of thing, so I haven't really been focusing too much on that, but for me, who primarily loved Wooden Railway, it is sadly no more. But we can still cherish these cool models that were made and appreciate the love and care that were put into them at the time. So if I open the sleeve here, you can see that Henry is looking very splendid. And I bought this Henry at Barnes & Noble. So you can see on the back there is the price tag for Barnes & Noble. I spent $22. I had a gift card, so really it was of no value to me what I actually had to shell out for this Henry. However, $22, I don't know. I go back and forth on if it's a fair price. Of course, it's a brick and mortar store, so you have to factor in that it's a little more costly, and I'm someone who's willing to go into a physical store and buy something like this, so I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Although, I guess if you look back at Toys R Us or maybe Walmart or Target where they used to sell Thomas Wooden Railway, the tender engines used to be around that range, so I don't think we can really complain since Thomas Wooden Railway has always been a very premium and expensive range. Looking at Henry at his side detailing, you can see it's pretty crisp. I tried to pick one where there was no visible miscues in printing or blemishes, and you can see the light hitting his paint right there, how glossy it is, which is really nice, and harkens back to specifically the old Thomas Wooden Railway of the 2000s, where Learning Curve put some kind of sheen on the paint that just made it sparkle in the light, and it felt so awesome. Here you can see his face, and we'll get to that in a second. The rest of his box is pretty generic, and I feel like I've gone through this with all these different reviews. It says Henry in a couple different languages. You can see it says, for example, track sold separately. At this point, they had gotten rid of the dirt detailing on the Clackety track, as it was called in this range. You have the nice logo there, the picture of Henry, and of course you have this tab on the back. If he was to be hung up, that could have been achieved. So let me get some scissors and we can properly open this Henry. I do have to say, I think this is one of my most anticipated models to get. I'm not really even that big of a fan of Henry in general, and I will try to unbox this off camera because I don't want to damage the model. I actually did that on Edward. I made a little dent in his running board, so I want to avoid that this time. But as I was saying, Henry is not one of my favorite characters. I've never really had any strong feelings about Henry, to be truly honest with you. But I think his model here is just so awesome, and that it's just so grand, and it really paints a high picture of him as one of the three big engines. And I think that's something that was strayed away from in the CGI series. I mean, it started in the Hit era as well. but I'm just glad to see a Henry that looks so proud, strong, and, for lack of a better word, healthy. Of course, I love his original wooden railway model just as much as anyone else, but looking back at the big engines like Emily or Henry or Gordon, or even some of the smaller ones, the mixed traffic ones like Edward and James, they all look a little bit pitiful compared to these new 2022 versions of their characters. So I got Henry out of the box there, and he is looking awesome. You can see how the light hits off that handrail detailing right there, and he just looks amazing. I feel like I'm just a broken record, but I have nothing but extremely high praise for this Henry model. So why don't we take a closer look at him? You can see his side detailing that, honestly, it looks pretty good compared to maybe some of the other engines I've got where the printed decals look, for lack of a better term, fuzzy. But on this Henry, it just looks pretty great. You can see that he has his dome right here, which is accurately closer back to his firebox, which I appreciate. And one other thing, I was actually watching some of these old episodes of my unboxing series, and I just want to be upfront and apologize for the embarrassing lack of knowledge I have about engines and what parts on them are called. I cringed at myself several times where I couldn't identify what a splasher was. I had trouble remembering side rods and pistons, domes, boilers, whatever. So I just want to be upfront and apologize for all of that. Looking back, that was pretty embarrassing that I couldn't identify those on the fly. So I've gotten better, I think, with trying to be more efficient and adequate at identifying these parts of an engine, very basic parts of an engine. But it was really never my strong suit. I always really liked the merch, but never really got into the nitty-gritty of trains. However, I'm making my way, don't worry. And on the bottom, it has the vertical Henry and that little cloud. And you can hear his chassis shake, and it just feels like a very premium model. There's a lot of good wood here, and really a far cry from that Thomas wood where it felt very light and very, very cheap. You can see he has the splashers. He has two up front and then one that is partially obscured by the firebox. I'm not sure what this is called. I think it's a feeder or something, but it is accurate to his model, so I'm glad they have that. He has a wider and stumpier funnel, which is, of course, accurate to his model. And really something that I can point out with these engines in the 2022 revival is that they are all very unique. Thomas Wooden Railway was standardized. It tried to be all-encompassing, that all engines kind of looked the same. They had, of course, obvious identifying features, but this line really tried to capture the individuality of these engines, which is something to be appreciated. He has buffer detailing on the front, and let's see, on the side, he has the pistons and side rods you can just barely see. And of course, it is accurate that he has 6 driving wheels and then these 4 wheels in front, which is awesome. The only bad part is, which has always annoyed me with these models, is that his wheels do not line up with the splashers. It kind of does on this back one, but these ones it really doesn't. That's just sort of a nitpick on my part. It has always bothered me. He has red lining, and his boiler is a really nice shape. I'm glad that it's fully curved like that. And he has also the side rods, which go extending from the firebox all the way to his smoke box up here. So that is all well and good. You can see he has that firebox glow. He also has the handrail detailing of the cab. The cab is kind of short and stumpy, and the roof is pretty rounded. Nothing on the back for him. And, of course, he has these wheels that are standard for all these 2022 items, which honestly really grew on me as this range went on through the years. I mean, it's been almost 3.5 years since this guy was released. But honestly, they have grown on me. I think they look pretty good, if I'm being all genuine with myself. I wasn't a fan at first, but over time, it definitely changed my opinion of these engines, Looking at his tender, finally, he has 6 wheels on his tender, which is similar to Gordon. I'll bring in his tender. Just look at these. I mean, they look such quality items. They look like they're based on the television series. And it just really is a testament to how much care and thought was put into these models when they're being made. You can see he has the 3D coal right here, which is the molded coal, and he has the number 3. Although, if the camera, you can see it's kind of grainy, the 3 right there. It looks pixelated almost, which is kind of weird. He does have the rivet detailing, which I don't think was actually ever on his CGI model, which is kind of weird that they decided to include it here. And he does have a stepladder there right on the edge. He does have the accurate sort of negative space, the divot here in his tender, which is accurate to his actual model. And I think it's time to bring in the old Henry. This is a 2003 Learning Curve Henry, and we can compare and contrast these guys. Let's do the tender first, work back to front. You can see the size difference in this tender, which is honestly kind of ridiculous. This tender to the left, the new one, is, I mean, that's almost like a centimeter bigger than this old tender right here. They both have a similar shape, but you can just see how much greater this tender is. If we mix and match here, that's a little bit cursed. But honestly, I mean, the 2022 Henry doesn't look bad with that old tender. But you can just see how much more complete he looks as an engine, a tender engine, with that other tender right there. So not much to say about those tenders, but if we compare these two Henrys, oh, one thing I forgot to talk about, obviously, was the face, which I had alluded to before. So let's have a discussion about the face. So the problem, in my opinion, with this Henry's face is that it's not a smiling face. And I know that subject has been beaten to death now, that everyone talks about, oh, it's not a smiley face. Oh, why did they use these weird expressions, a surprise face Gordon and Rebecca and blah, blah, blah. And I'm not too against it. I mean, I get they're trying to go for sort of something that's collectible so that you can recreate maybe specific scenes or episodes of Big World, Big Adventures or All Engines Go. But again, agreeing with everyone, it would have been great to have a smiley face. This Henry face isn't half bad. This is sort of based on the hit era Henry face, if it would focus, thank you. And as I said, it's not too bad, but this Henry face honestly isn't terrible. It looks like he's looking off to his upper left there, which is kind of weird. And I think this is based off a specific episode or maybe a scene. I feel like I've seen that face in CGI Thomas before. And I can hear Henry's voice, his voice actor, in my head. Sort of that lower pitched, oafish voice in my head. And I guess that's a testament to the face is pretty accurate to the CGI series that I'm able to do that. But honestly, not a terrible face. If he had just flipped the eyebrows, it would have been a great smiling face, but alas, it looks like he's sort of nervously laughing or maybe a little worried about something, which of course is a whole nother can of worms that Henry has been pigeonholed and portrayed as a worrying engine for whatever reason was established. I think maybe that started in the Thomas Bible that was released, that I think maybe Abby Grant sort of wrote that, not to blame her, but I remember she might have been the author of that Thomas Bible for the hit era that completely shattered the franchise and all continuity there. But to close here, I think both Henrys are fairly good, although you can see the lack of detail on this one, its simplicity, and then much more refined detail on this Henry right here. Of course, the dome is so much further up on this guy. He doesn't have as wide of a funnel, no buffer detailing on the front, no piston or side rod detailing, of course painted on splashers instead of these real ones. So all in all, just a very different model, and I am very happy to have this new Henry. This will always have a special place in my heart, of course, But I'd have to say that the new Henry kind of takes the cake in terms of Thomas Wooden Railway Henry merchandise. Quickly, I'll bring in Gordon right here, and you can see how great these two engines look together. I can just picture a season 1 episode or maybe season 2 episode in my head with these two guys. If you add in James, you could do Trouble in the Shed or something similar, and it would just look so great and so accurate to the television series, which at the end of the day, this merchandise is trying to emulate. I am very happy with purchasing this Henry, and I can't really remember my rankings, as I mentioned from other episodes, but I'd have to say that between this Gordon and Henry, these might be my two favorite models in the entire revived range. I'll bring in Diesel here. Diesel, I took a look at him months and months ago, but pulling him off my shelf for just this little interstitial at the end here, I think that he looks awesome as well. I can't really remember what I said earlier in the video, if I'm being quite honest, but I'm sure I had good things to say about him because he caught my eye as soon as I picked him off the shelf. So these two engines, honestly, might be some of the best in the range, and I'm very upset, as many of you probably are, that this range is now dead in the water. I really do not understand. It seems like we have something new planned for Thomas in 2026 with All Engines Go ending. I don't know why they can't consistently keep up with any specific merchandise range. It's, quite frankly, for lack of a better word, obnoxious and just dejecting that they can't find a consistent pattern or release schedule for merchandise. And really, that's all I have to say. It's disappointing. And I really don't know another way to phrase it other than we can cherish these items that were released in 2022 and hope for greener pastures, no pun intended with Henry, in the future. But to close out, I think these are great items, some of the best of the range, and hopefully you enjoyed this video even though it was so Frankensteined in the end. So, of course, I get very busy with real life and there won't be as many videos as I'd hope or maybe you'd wish, but there will be some content in the future, so stay tuned for that. I have been Wooden Railway Edward, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you, and I will see you in the next one.